Okay, so this is long overdue. It's basically an explanation of why there can't be an exact unit tier list for Dragon Invasion. Basically, it's because there's two kinds of stats or buffs for damage. Stats that affect your total damage, they increase your total damage output. These would be attack speed, critical damage, critical hit, attack percentage, attack amplification. Those will all increase your total damage. That's the white text damage at the end of a fight when they are differentiated. They're not in all game modes. Then you have offensive stats that affect the ratio of total to actual damage and anti-mitigation things. These would be units damage, units damage reduction, DRR, penetration, holy emblem attack, and I think that's all of them. All the major ones anyway. These are in the orange text, the actual damage checkbox in the stats screen, and these will increase the amount of your total damage that gets through and results in actual damage as hit points lost or points scored in Dragon Invasion. Now, most awakenings follow kind of this pattern, right? Let me look at elves here. This side is crit damage. That increases total damage. This side, units damage. That increases ratio. You get the same thing on the top. This one increases ratio. This because it's penetration and units damage, and this one increases total damage because it's crit hit and crit damage. Also, not just the ones that apply to themselves, like say, where's Isel? Here she is. This one, it like reduces tenacity, but it increases crit hit basically, which increases total damage, and this one increases unit damage, or it does DRR, so that increases the ratio. A lot of these units and their abilities. Also, the units in particular, support units like Bone Dragon and Nightmare do not do anything to boost total damage, but they do a great boost to your total to actual ratio through DRR. Monk, on the other hand, with the global Woke Monk with the global crit damage buff, or Druid, if she would stay in range, would affect total damage. Manticore actually does both because when he's awoke and his weapon both can lower tenacity, which is a total damage. So Manticore can do both. Revi's another one that does both because he gives attack speed. See, the unit damage affects ratio, but the attack speed and the crit damage affects total. And then on the debuff, it lowers, it does DRR, which affects the ratio as well. And this is also influenced by the emblems you have, obviously, because Holy Emblem Attack is a big one for the ratio side. Emblem, she has the better emblem set because my marksman can't use these, so he can only get to 54, not 55. In any case, she's got lots of Holy Emblem Attack, 335 plus 260 for mastery, so 600 or 595. She's also got max crit damage from emblem, 60%. It's 25% on all 6 of those. But these are also most of them are perfect, and they have attack amplification. His that he's wearing right now, on the other hand, do not have shit for attack amplification. They have pretty good Holy Emblem attack. They have this almost the same 290 versus 335, and because they're lower cast, he's at mastery 46 right now. I could make them both 50, but anyway. But then he also, his crit damage is only a third of what hers was. Attack amplification isn't even that quarter. So the emblems make a difference here too. Although he does have that penetration skill, which gives him an advantage on the ratio side. Anyway, let's get into the test I ran today. I just did some runs all the way to the stats screen to demonstrate this. So on this first run, the Ice Elemental's Ice Wall is set to do DRR instead of reducing tenacity. And elves get a unit damage instead of crit damage. So this should have slightly higher ratio scores for everybody and slightly lower total, in particular for the elves. So you can see here the elves did 1.352 billion total damage. 31.52% of that got past the dragon's mitigation and defenses, and resulting in a score of 426.2 million for the elves. The marksman and Black Knight respectively had total damages of 923.0 million and 351.1 million at ratios of 30.12% and 26.41%, giving them respective scores of 278 million even and 992.7 million. So you can see elves have the best ratio than marksmen than Black Knights. That's due to the Holy Emblem attack and the mastery levels. And they also have way higher total damage. That's primarily due to all their attack amplification and crit damage on their emblems. So now for the second run, all I'm changing is Ice Elemental Awaken. So Ice Wall lowers tenacity instead of damage reduction. And then the Elves Awakening, that gives them critical damage instead of unit damage. So we should see an increase in total and a slight drop in ratio for everyone, and quite a bit more for the elves because they have a specific awakening that's changed, and also because all their crit damage on their emblems makes the crit hit boost from the ice wall more significant. So you can see the actual score was almost identical. We got 864.91 million. Last time we got 865.1. So 200,000 difference. Although I actually expected the second run to outperform. I'll explain the reasons why I think it didn't in a minute. But if you look here, the ratio for the Black Knight dropped from 26.41 to 26.31. The marksman dropped from 30.12 to 29.99, so really small drops, about 0.1% each. Whereas the ratio for the elves dropped a full percentage point, a little bit over, 31.52 to 30.46. But the elves' actual score was almost identical, only 100,000 difference, because their total damage was 40 million higher, but their ratio was 1% lower. The only unexpected of the 9 data points is the marksman's total damage was actually about 5 million lower the second run. It's not even 1% difference. It's probably because of his lower crit damage. But as for how this makes it impossible to have a precise tier listing for units or awakening choices, 10 billion total score doesn't do you any good if your ratio is only 1%, and vice versa. If your ratio is 90% but your total damage is only 1 million, that also ain't going to do you any good. Since the dragon's defenses are so high, you generally want to max DRR and Holy Emblem attack for the ratio. But once you get your ratio up to around what seems to be about 30%ish for your Sharpies, then the stats that boost your total attack start to become more valuable again. And then you hit level Dragon 31 and you go back, and the ratio stats and boosts are going to be more important. So for me, generally right now, the increased crit ice wall on Ice Elemental actually performs better. In this last test, I did happen to score like less than a 20th% lower, and my guess is because I was auto running. So I would usually get a little bit more ratio bonus by killing the little dragons right away, which increased the big dragon's defense. And I also use my last rush tactic. Well, I don't even have rush tactic marked because I'm doing auto, and it won't cast it on the ranged. But when I manual, I use rush tactic, and the final cast I put on the melee to get quicker stacks of Nightmare and Manticore and DE up. So that last little boost to my ratio would be enough that normally the changing Ice Elementals Awaken is slightly beneficial for me instead of a 0.02% loss. But that's because I have a ton of Holy Emblem attack and a ton of DRR. Awaken Nightmare, Awaken Bone Dragon, which I removed. I got rid of my Cannon, which is doing DRR. Got rid of BK, which was doing DRR. I removed one DE from the Ice Elemental, so it's not stacking that DRR. And I took the 2 non-POAs off of both Sharpies, so that drops their mastery level on their Holy Emblem attack quite a bit. So now everyone's ratio should be much lower, and the total boosting Awaken for the Elf and the Ice Elemental versus the ratio boosting one should do worse, a lot more than 0.02% worse. Now I can only do 2 more to the stat screen, so I just doing these two to the final frenzy, almost the very end, I decided to go to. When you cast alts, it makes the timer in the game slow down, practically pause for. So I can use the frenzy here to make it even easier to find the exact frame, which is coming up right here, and we're at 198.34 million. So now we're going to change the ice elemental and the elves awakens back. When we did that in the first test, we dropped 865.1 to 864.91. So if we were to drop at that same rate here, we'd end up at like 98.29 million, or less than a tenth of a percent, less than a 20th of a percent drop. So hopefully you should be able to see why you can't definitively say that one unit or awaken choice is better than the other. For instance, before Dragon level 31, my ratios were good enough that it was better for me to ditch the Black Knight and his 30% DRR for Storm Elemental and the 25% attack speed boost, or Monk was also a lot more competitive than. But when I first hit Dragon level 31, before unit damage from the support combos, before Nightmare Awakening, or before a lot of my 5-star awakenings, then I wanted to use the DRR Ice Wall Awaken, and I didn't want to use Storm Elemental anymore because my ratios dropped by over half. So DRR again became my number one goal. Anyway, you can see here that changing those two awakens dropped the score 7.13 million. That's 3.6% drop. That's 60 times the drop we saw at the high level DRR. And in my real manual runs now, it's actually an improvement to make that switch because my ratio is gotten so good again. In fact, it's probably the Storm Elemental's attack speed is probably better again than the DRR I get from the Black Knight. But with the Black Knight weapon, he's getting 100 million damage. So it's not worth making that switch, but it does change my awakens. So here for the final test, I'm going to run to the stats. What I'm doing is I'm giving emblems back to the Sharpies, bringing back the fire cannon, and but I'm bringing Monk and Storm Elemental. My goal this time is just to see. I'm leaving behind Nightmare and Bone Dragon still, so my ratio should be much lower, but I want to actually do more damage, more total damage than the other runs, but with a lower score because of the worse ratio. And obviously changing, entire units is going to have a bigger impact than just, switching an awaken or two. So if you remember all the way back, 12 minutes ago at the beginning of the video, when I was saying Manticore and Revi affect both total and ratio, I think that's why maybe people have ditched him, because for a while he fell off. But his awaken stacks tenacity reduction, and his weapon does some tenacity reduction. So he can actually boost your total damage, in addition to the benefit your ratio gets from his stacking DRR. So the stacking DRR at certain points, like when you level the dragon, or before you get before you get a bunch of Holy Emblem attack, for instance, like I have, then he might not have made the cut for your A team. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't revisit it. Just like when I originally tested a lot of awakens, the better one changed. And you can see here the experiment was the sharpshooter did like 1.35 and 1.39 billion damage on the first two runs, almost at 1.8 billion here. So right away you can see that we did way more total damage than any of the other runs. Same goes for the Archer and the Dread Knight. But if we look at the percentages, their ratios here, even though we had massive gains in total damage, the highest ratio is 17.13%. And before, the Elves and Marksmen were both over 30%, and the BK was really close. So you can see how in this situation, if this was my actual team, I would want to focus my ratio more than my total damage. But if you get to the point where your DRR is high enough and your Holy Emblem attack's high enough, it can be worthwhile to actually focus your total damage. But if you manage to pick up what I'm trying to put down here, you'll be able to figure out where you're at. Like I said, most people still want to go for the ratio, but that's not a universal rule. It has to do with the level dragon you have and how much mitigation it has relative to how much ratio boosting stats and emblems and awakenings you have. And that's something that obviously is going to change, so any testing you've done in the past may be outdated. As a general rule of thumb, like I said, I think if you're doing Sharpies, once you see about 30% ratio, and maybe some more testing of awakens and units is due for you. With my current stats, obviously that's the tipping point, because I had almost identical scores when I switched in auto runs. But anyway, as usual, hope this helped. Thanks for watching.